Thanks a lot, web development students. Let's get started in learning some JavaScript. And I think it bears a strong question, which is, what is the role that JavaScript plays? And really, traditionally, the value of JavaScript is that it acts as a kind of programming language. And if you think about HTML and CSS, there's nothing really programmable about it. Really, it's just a static framework that appears the same way every time, but it's not really about data, and it's not really about logic. So there's nothing really programmable about HTML. It's just purely a presentational framework, and it's the direction of presentation. But what's so interesting about JavaScript is that JavaScript is really as versatile as any given programming language. So let's go into web, and let's make a static web project. We could also just make an HTML file, though the static web project is of interest to me because we could add lots of files to it. So why don't we do that for the basis of this kind of exercise? And we're going to call this our JavaScript workbook. And I have on our Stack Overflow about 20 different examples that I would like for you to code right here. And what I may do is I may upload a PDF of this so you can print it out and keep it with you and code along with it. I know that's what I have just sitting right next to me here, is this entire workbook printed out. And I promise you that by the time that you have coded all 20 of these examples, your JavaScript is going to start to be more intuitive. And you're going to be looking the code up less and using it more. So we don't have a target runtime, no default. It's just a very basic configuration. And then we'll take a look at the project as it boots up. The JavaScript workbook is going to be here. I have a lot of projects. You might not have as many. Inside of web content, I'm going to go ahead and ask for a new HTML file. And I'll call this x1.html. That'll be fine. And so this will be the basic template that gets laid down there. It's going to be the HTML5 template. And so here we have the beginnings of this. Now I had a student who reminded me of how to zoom in. How do I zoom in again? Is that great? Okay. All right. Much props to Osvaldo, who is my technical consigliere. So you can see our basic HTML structure right there. I'm going to get past the head part. Now what's interesting is that you guys have dealt a lot with the head because you would have been embedding the CSS right around here. That link to the style sheet, that'll happen somewhere inside of the head. And I can put here, that title is going to appear at the top of the browser when I load it. Now just some notes on execution. You can go to your project here and you can say to Eclipse, okay Eclipse, let's go, wow, I'm not used to it being that big. Let's go to the System Explorer, and here's that JavaScript workbook and web content. And there's that, you can click that and you can see, okay, no, that's a little ridiculous. But you can see the title has been kind of executed right there. And so you can see the title playing a role already. That's great. Oh, wow. Okay. So that's how we craft the title. Not a big deal, but it helps you to keep track of what exercise you're doing. Now let's emphasize what we're doing inside of the body here. Let's create a heading 1 that's going to say JavaScript input validation. That's going to close that H1 there, no problem. And I'm going to say please input a number between 1 and 10 below, and then we'll close up. And Eclipse does a good job of helping me to close these tags, so it gives me a little bit of productivity. And we're going to create an input, and we're going to give it an ID. Now JavaScript really likes IDs. CSS really likes classes. So if you know that if I can identify like a text input, give it an ID, I can later program with the logic of the content of that box later. So that ID is going to be pretty meaningful to me. And then I'll say the input type, like the data type that's going into that, is going to be of type number. And then I'm going to put HTML5 gives me a button very quickly. And that's just a basic HTML5 type called a button. And I'm going to say the moment that I click that button, I want you to run a function called myFunction. And then the caption on that button should be submit this. And then I will wrap up the button. So you have sort of a start tag and an end tag. And then I want to create an additional paragraph here whose ID is going to be demo for our demonstration purposes. And that we can wrap up that paragraph right there. So already you can see that something new is happening, which is this ID, and that's going to help us to program with the content inside of that interface. And so within the body, I want to initiate a script. And what it does is it separates the instructions that I'm going to give here from the HTML on the page. So that script, I'm going to call a function called myFunction. And it's going to be just like these empty parameters are going to kind of characterize this function right here. Now I frankly like to make my brackets look like this. That's just way more readable. I think a newbie programmer would really benefit from structuring their functions like this. It's becomes so much more readable. I want you to create two variables. One is called x, the other is called text. And then I want to put in a little bit of commenting here. I'm going to say get the value inside the input field with ID is equal to num. And so I want to say let the value of x be equal to get the element by ID called num inside this document. Now remember, this document is called, what do we call it? This document is exercise1.html. So inside of JavaScript, JavaScript operates with what's called a document object model, or the DOM. So the document is the highest level object inside of JavaScript. And then outside of that document is the window, right, where the URL is present. And we can navigate to different locations using the location of the window. But here the document contains various elements. So we have a num element, and we also have a demo element. So I want to grab whatever's inside of that num element right there, get the element by ID num. And we want to determine the value of that. Then let's say if x is not a number for whatever reason, or less than or greater than 10, and we'll sort of test by saying is not a number if x is not a number, or x is less than 1, or x is greater than 10, and let's bracket this. This is just my personal preference. You'll find that other people don't like to do this, but I find this so easy to read, it just simplifies my day. Go ahead and set that text variable that you defined equal to your input is not useful, not a number. Otherwise, say that let's thank the user, and then let's go to the bottom of that and say, then get the element by ID. Go ahead and type into the demo ID right here. Remember, this is a paragraph. And a paragraph is just a block of text that's bounded by one space at the top, one space at the bottom. And so go ahead and place inside of that demo paragraph, produce content inside of that that's equivalent to text. So inside of demo, it's either going to say your input is not useful or the text is a usable number, thanks a lot. And so I can either write into that element or I can grab the value inside of it. And that should be the end of my script right there. So let's firm up. Let's get rid of some of our white space there. And so here's just a little bit of web development. And your little program is embedded right inside of your HTML. So you have a little bit of interface. You have a little bit of programming logic. And then from there, we can pretty much close the app. You have the body and the HTML right there. The page will run this kind of a script no matter where you put the script. I find that it works a little bit better when you have the ID defined above and then you program with it below. So let's go ahead and take that out for a spin, and let's have us negotiate over to the this web page. Okay, so you can see there's a couple things that have taken place. And you can see when I run this is the exercise 1, and this is you can see the JavaScript is happening right there. And this is this is the script that's running right there. So let's dial up and let's submit this. Yes, it's a number, usable number, thanks a lot. And that's kind of always going to happen. But because of the logic here, if x is less than 1, or if it's greater than 10, it's going to say, sorry, that's not useful. So let's go above 10, and it's still not useful. But if I kind of subtract and I go below, let's say, thanks a lot. That's a useful number. And that's me just controlling content and structure. HTML responsible for the structure, JavaScript responsible for the content, but JavaScript supplying a useful way for me to control what content appears inside of what structural element. So as long as you guys apply an ID next to any given HTML element, then you can control the data that's sent back and forth to that element. That's the basics of JavaScript. That won't change. That's basic, intermediate, advanced JavaScript all in one. So I want to leave that as a quick example. Then I'd like for you guys to start playing with it. Is there any good questions? You guys, anybody want to discuss? Ready? Yes, sir.
So in Eclipse, as far as JavaScript goes, it's not going to help you with any of the other things you would normally see in Java.
I'm sorry, say again.
So like when you code in Java and you're coding against Java library, it will autocomplete when you try to use certain keywords?
The question was whether we code in Java, will it autocomplete? And let me just say that the web development feature is not as far along in Eclipse as the Java. Java is just very, very fine. Truth be told, you can do a lot of web development within Java, but it won't work the same. You can't, but the HTML won't do a lot of the auto typing quite as nicely as the, but Java doesn't do a lot of auto completion here either. It does a lot of auto kind of error, fixing, So, all right, so let me push this up to YouTube right away, and I hope you start to fool around with this. I'm going to locate our samples here, 311 week 3 JS examples, and I'll give you a solid URL where to find the workbook.